our entry point is much earlier at what you might call TRL, technology readiness level 2, 3, 4. While the term technology readiness does not fully indicate the 360 degrees of readiness companies need, that at least refers to technology maturity. And when you're starting at that level, a lot of things are not yet defined. What exactly is the market we are going after? What exactly is the pain point being addressed? And what's the product? And within that product, what's the core technology? You might have started with a certain core technology, but does that actually fit the market needs? And this is the messy iterative journey that is so difficult, that leads to what we classically call valley of death. We see ourselves as basically the Sherpas or guides to that valley of death.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Speciale Focus, where we explore the frontiers of India's deep tech ecosystem. Brought to you by Speciale Invest, a leading early-stage deep tech VC firm in India. I'm Hariarakli, and in this episode, we are joined by Raghu Dharmaraju, CEO of ARTPARK in Bengaluru. Established 5 years ago by the Indian Institute of Science under the National Mission for Interdisciplinary Cyber-Physical Systems, ARTPARK, which stands for Artificial Intelligence and Robotics Technology Park, is a unique organization focused on translating AI and robotics research into real-world products. Operating through a triple helix model that bridges academia, industry, and government, the organization aims to bolster India's economy, society, and sovereignty. Raghu describes ARTPARK as a venture garage that supports innovators as they navigate the treacherous valley of death, the difficult journey from early-stage lab concepts, think of it as technology readiness levels 2 to 4, to market-ready technologies. In this episode, we dive into the messy iterative process of innovation, the emergence of a domestic robotics ecosystem, and the ambitious vision for BRAINZ with a Z, a massive new innovation zone called the Bengaluru Robotics and AI Innovation Zone, being developed in collaboration with the Government of Karnataka. We also discuss the critical need for growth capital and strategic autonomy in core hardware like chips and sensors. Join us for an insightful conversation on how ARTPARK is building the next generation pipeline of Indian deep tech innovators. Raghu, thank you for making time for this, and welcome to Speciale Focus. ARTPARK is very much in the thick of this ecosystem, and we've had some very exciting developments in India in terms of public-private partnerships, as well as from the government side, the noteworthy Research and Development Innovation Fund that was announced last year. And obviously, everyone is hoping that the momentum will continue in 2026. So to get us started, please give us a brief history of ARTPARK, sort of a glimpse into the conversations that went into starting it and its mandate, and then let's go from there.
Sure. Thank you, Harichandan, for having me. And I should acknowledge that Speciale has been a great partner to us. They have been part of our mentorship programs. They've been part of our community right from the beginning. And we have really appreciated that. Right. So let's jump into the history a little bit. So ARTPARK was created about 5 years ago. Right. It was created under the National Mission for Interdisciplinary Cyber-Physical Systems, or NMICPS. It's a DST program, and it was created by IISc under this program as an entity that's going to be focused on AI and robotics, translation, and applied R&D, all towards creating products that actually get used and ventures that hopefully benefit our economy, right? And today we bill ourselves as robotics and AI for economy, society, and sovereignty. And our mission is to build the next gen pipeline of innovations as well as innovators in robotics and AI, right? Now, when you say the moment you say translation, it's not something you can just do in the lab, right? So this was recognized by IC right from the beginning. And everything we do happens in a collaborative manner across three ecosystems. We are obviously born out of academia, but they brought in talent from outside academia, of course. I'm an example of that, having spent time in commercializing technologies in the US and such. Right? Industry and of course government is the third part of the so-called triple helix model we often hear. Right? I hope that gives you a sense for our history and how we were born. Essentially, our goal is to create technologies and products that actually get used, right? But at the same time, they're rooted in deep technology innovation, not just wrappers and thin technology innovation on someone else's deep technology innovation.
Okay. So, can you expand a little bit on the point that you made in terms of the mandate being building products that are relevant for both society and sovereignty and the economy and so on? What are some of the specific focus areas? Obviously, in the name itself, AI and robotics are prominent.
Sure.
That apart, what are some of the other areas where you've made an impact?
Yeah. So we have, see, all our projects start as what you might call as internal innovation projects. In fact, we might start earlier as innovators in residence. At some point, we say these are innovation projects, and then we spin out, so to say, for profit venture, or if it's a non-profit venture sort of thing, it will continue to run under our umbrella as a digital public good. Right now, we have done things such as robotics components, robotic arms. We have done a lot of work in space of drones, both hardware and software. So we've also done work in what you refer to as Industry 5.0. On the AI for social good side, there's been work across health, climate, and languages. Right. So I hope this gives you a broad overview. Right. In terms of verticals, if you were to say, you can think of manufacturing, mobility, right, as like a industry verticals. But we generally think of AI and robotics as broad. We've also actually we're also building companies in robotics that have an overlap with healthcare, for example, right? So yeah, it's been broad spectrum. We haven't been vertical specific, but I hope this gives you a sense of the breadth of things that we are doing.
Okay. Can you give us a sense of, on a day to day basis, how does ARTPARK operate? Sort of a day in the life of the people at ARTPARK, in the sense that how has it evolved over the 5 years? What takes up sort of the core of your work? Do you incubate startups and help them? Do you facilitate collaborations? What is at the heart of ARTPARK today?
As Professor Bharadwaj, who is the director executive of ARTPARK and professor at IISc, says, and in some sense, he's probably someone comes closest to being a founder of this organization, right? As he says, a unit of production for us is an innovation project, right? An innovation project can start with a market need or an idea that has come from some technologist, right? So our entire work is now to take this concept or an idea all the way to a product that someone is using and someone is paying for, right? That's the whole unit of production. And now that's an iterative process. Typically, that journey starts at something like TRL3 or so, right? TRL3 or 4 for us, because we are not here to do what others do, right? Let me differentiate that. Let me explain that a little bit better. There might be investors who would invest at TRL 6, 7, 8 stage. We typically, that's not our entry point. Our entry point is much earlier. at what you might call TRL, technology readiness level 2, 3, 4. Right? While the term technology readiness does not fully indicate the 360 degrees of readiness companies need, that at least refers to technology maturity. And when you're starting at that level, a lot of things are not yet defined. What exactly is the market we are going after? What exactly is the pain point being addressed? And what's the product? And within that product, what's the core technology? You might have started with a certain core technology, but does that actually fit the market needs? And this is the messy iterative journey that is so difficult, that leads to what we classically call valley of death. We see ourselves as basically the Sherpas or guides to that valley of death. Not in a way, in a condescending parental way. Ultimately, these are hugely driven innovators we bring on board. But hopefully, we provide the facility, ecosystem, right? Critical financial support, right? And various types of operational and administrative uh, uh, support. And of course, not to mention for hardware, space, right? Space and prototyping and testing, facilities, right? So these are all things. So day to day is essentially helping one or more of these innovation teams really realize their mission, get to product market fit, right? So I could be helping, I could be doing, calls to some investors to connect some of our startups, could be hosting very senior level government or international visitors, taking them to one or the other startup to show them what they are doing because we think there's relevance. Or it could be doing a deep dive to really understand what the challenges for one particular startup is, where they are, where do they need help, so on and so forth. Right? So I don't know if this gives you a sense, but ultimately the mission is, getting our teams across this valley of death.
Okay, that's very interesting. So, all these folks that you've brought in together, these bright minds, they would come from private industry as well as possibly many of them have come from IIC where they're maybe pursuing their masters or PhDs and things like that.
Yes, it's been a really nice combination, right? We have faculty who have who have spun out startups. We've also had recent graduates, right, start startups. But we have, I would say, a majority, right, an overwhelming majority of our talent actually comes from the outside, right? We have innovators in residence who have spent 2 to 3 decades in places like Bosch, Cisco, so on. We also have mid-career fast track professionals who have spent time at Ati Motors, right? At the same time, we have folks who have just spent a couple of years out of the college. So we definitely are not ageist, right? We just know that along with the deep research ecosystem that IISc brings, and by the way, we are not limited to only IISc even in terms of research ecosystem. I'll give you some examples. We just know that the research ecosystem by themselves, they know how to do research. They know how to solve really tough problems. The journey of taking that all the way to TRL 7 or 8 is a very different type of discipline and journey, right? It requires uh, really great, engineering chops, right? It requires ability to iterate very quickly. It requires some level of obsession to actually solve the problem. Otherwise, the technology might not. So, and it requires knowing how do you go from that early stage concept to an early prototype to something that works in customer settings to ultimately some pilots and co-creation to orders, right? There's a journey. And this is not something that is there in our research ecosystem. This comes from industry, right? So we bring that talent from the industry to complement, the research and academic talent pipelines that we have access to. We've had people come back from the US to join us, right? And one of Thwara's co-founders Kaushik is a great example. He was at US Naval Research, had finished his PhD, at Johns Hopkins. He was a bachelor's from, if I'm not wrong, NIT Trichy, right? So, yeah, I think we are, while we certainly draw on our talent pool here at ISC, majority of our talent actually comes from beyond, right?
Okay, it's a good point to jump into some specific examples of projects and startups that you have spun out. Please walk us through some of these examples, maybe also, from different sectors and so on.
Sure. I'll give you an example, Twara, that recently got an investment from one of India's major manufacturing equipment makers. Um, they were actually the team initially involved in the humanoid project you came across, right? In trying to the humanoid, what they realized were precise actuation is one of the key challenges to be solved for. And while there are several folks around the world that make these actuators, there's no one in India who actually have designed this from the ground up or have any sort of differentiation. They have innovated a novel gearbox. These are called harmonic actuators. And they also have a US patent now, but they did not stop at the component level. They actually built uh, robotic arms, and those are being used by industry, customers such as L&T and so on. So this is one example of a robotic component as well as actually robotic arms. I'll give you another example. Comrado. Comrado is building hybrid vertical takeoff and landing drones with more than 100-kilometer range and 6 hours of endurance for various tasks. And most recently, defense really picked up on them strongly, right? And now they are basically building these things for surveillance. It's a 4-meter wingspan drone, so it's not a small thing, right? Um, these are both great hardware examples. I'll give you an example of on the software side, Zenteek. Zenteek is a startup by a faculty founder, um, and it is building what's called scientific foundation models for engineering design, which would allow for hopefully much faster iteration of engineering design, and it's also informed by science. Now, scientific foundation models are, in some sense, you can think of as another type of core component for really the future of industry, right? Uh, an example on the AI for social good side, we have work by Professors Rajesh Sundaresan and Siva Atreya that we have taken forward, and working with Bengaluru State and State of Karnataka and City of Bangalore to create a dengue outbreak prediction system. We are also working on things like heat wave risk for health, right? This is also a prediction model. So these are some of the examples. I hope, yeah, it gives you a sense of the breadth of things we're doing and some examples of that.
Okay. Uh, Given your own sort of vast experience in terms of how successful tech products are commercialized and so on, and you have experience of that in the US market as well. When you look at a company like Twara, can you tell us about what comes to your mind in terms of what helped them succeed? And you alluded to how their own journey was also what you earlier called sort of a messy iterative journey. And eventually, of course, now they've hit upon a really successful product. So, can you talk about what are some of the practical and some intangibles that combine to make them successful today?
Yeah, I mean, Thora is a great example. The first thing but I will draw on many examples, right? Uh, Examples that come to my mind: Algofed, uh, Cosmic, Yanendriya, right? Very, very different products. But at the helm of all these things are very driven uh, founders or founding team. Right now, we cannot always tell who can be founders. It just evolves over time when they come on board as innovators in distance. And when we see that spark, we really try to give them a push. Right. So can't overemphasize really the need for a leadership team that is very driven to solve problems. The second element is they should have technical depth, at the same time some level of breadth. Right. If someone brings in a very narrow technical depth but does not have the ability to stitch together a product that invariably takes not just a narrow technology, might be not just their PhD specialization, but things that are broader. And if they are not able to bring that together, then they don't get off the ground, right? You talked about intangibles, so I'm giving you these as intangibles. Third is also, I would say, a highly iterative mindset. The more flexible you are, the more you are willing to kind of absorb what the world is trying to tell you, right? As opposed to stick on with it and keep perfecting the technology alone. But don't get me wrong, there is no business for ARTPARK if you are not building technologically differentiated products. At the same time, there's no business for ARTPARK if you're not trying to make it a product that someone is going to use and someone is going to pay for, right? So these are, uh, I would say, key elements. This both technology differentiation and customer focus at the same time is quite, quite important. And this iterative journey also becomes important, right? And the breadth of team.
Okay. Um, can you also sharpen the focus of these points in the following sense? How would you decide which initiatives or which potential founder you know can be encouraged in terms of a sort of VC approach, sort of looking ahead, and which initiatives would you decide are better suited to become open tools, public good and things like that?
Yeah, actually, that's fairly straightforward. It depends a lot on the markets, right? So when, for example, we have a company called Uncharted that is building a stack of software for products such as rovers, right, in mining as well as space setup. Now, it's very clear that their whole pipeline, the whole value chain is a for profit value chain, right? Now, contrast this to, let's say, the LLM based assistant for frontline health workers managing high risk pregnancies, right? They are essentially addressing, a customer segment that is bottom 50% of the economic pyramid, so to say. There aren't margins to be had, right? It's going to scale mostly through non-profit and government programs. Tremendous impact. But if you ask someone to pay for it, it's probably not going to happen, right? So it is basically this distinction, and things are pretty clear right at the beginning which way we want to go, right? So we understand the overlap between economic returns and inclusive or broad societal benefit. It's a Venn diagram, right? It's a classic Venn diagram. So when something, and there are few, very rarely do you come across things that can make a lot of profit, VC fundable profits, right? As well as have broad societal impact, right? So that's the way. I don't know if that gives you some sense.
Yeah, it definitely sort of clears up your approach. I want to switch back to asking about two sectors that are also in Art Park's name itself, and also sectors that over the last 18 months especially have become the center of mind for everyone. Even AI now is almost, it looks like, giving way to physical AI as the big thing that all the VCs are talking about. So on the robotics side of it, if you take a step back and look at what's happening in India, not just within ARTPARK, obviously a very important part of that. Overall, can you give us a sense of whether, even if it's nascent, a promising robotics ecosystem developing in India, what do you see that is really good and exciting? What is still work in progress, and so on, in the evolution of this ecosystem in India?
Yeah, it's early days, but it's very exciting, right? You're saying hardware startups come out, and also at the same time, folks are getting. I mean, we by the way, our ecosystem has typically always favored software, right? But robotics is a play where the physical and the software has have to come together, and we are seeing that, right? Um, we know of multiple folks who are building what you might call uh, vision-based perception systems, uh, which are the inside. You can think of it as intelligence inside the robots. When you and I go out there, for example, into unstructured terrain, um, of, let's say, our backyard, or for that matter, walking through the greens in ISC, um, or another type of unstructured terrain, our own kitchens, right? Sometimes, right? Kitchens or our rooms. We don't bump into things even if we go into an environment for the first time, right? So how come we make sense of going into an environment and see things in 2D and know what it is, right? So there's a whole bunch of a whole bunch of folks working in this space of making sense of our environment. The other thing is also uh, manipulation, right? Something as simple as uh, our phone that we hold in our hand, we turn it, twist it. We could hold it in so many angles, hold it to our ear in so many angles, and we never drop it. But that's not true for me anyway. I drop it many times, but most people do not drop it in a way that hurts them, right? So that is stress manipulation. Another area. The third area is what you might, and these are all interrelated areas. Another area that's often talked about is, uh, you know, then what you might call the actual actuation. That is the actual movement, and all of that, right? So all these interlinked areas we see people working on. One example of a company that recently came to us from actually IIT Gandhinagar is a company called Dexcent. They are building. Think of this as a three-fingered, manipulator. Right, it's like a hand, right? Three fingers, and it has 12 degrees of freedom. Now, in it are mechanics that have to work seamlessly with the brains of it, right? So it has to see, figure out what it is, and do what it needs to do, right? So this whole stack is coming together pretty well in India. I do think we are quite behind globally, but the pace of doing this has actually gotten off. We ourselves at ARTPARK, for example, are working with a company called Kinesthetic, uh, that is actually set up a small, you might call, robot data harvesting farm, right? Because ultimately all these tasks you learn from data, and they built various types of uh, gizmos and gadgets, if you say, through which you make robots do what a human is doing at the same time. And in manipulating that, we are also teaching the robot how it would do certain tasks independently, right? And the innovation in latest models are such that you don't necessarily have to train for each step, right? Which is, perception, making sense, and doing, right? You have models that now just go from vision all the way to action, right? I don't know. I hope I give you a sense for it. And hardware stuff is also happening, right? There's Perceptine out of Hyderabad, for example, that's doing some amazing work. We know of folks like Adverb, of course, that in some sense is a more mature. I don't know if we want to call them startup anymore, right? So I really feel like India is at a point we are putting together a full stack. The point I do one area I do worry about is core fundamental technologies, hardware side, and this is especially chips and sensors. These are two areas I think India needs to get much better at if we are going to get to what you call strategic autonomy in these spaces.
Yeah, you sort of anticipated my next question. What can be done? I mean, in terms of practical steps, does it boil down to money and infrastructure and attracting top talent? Obviously, we cannot compete with $1 billion funding that one startup like a Figure AI or somebody can raise in the US, etc. That obviously that approach is not available to us. So therefore, what can we do to build these core technologies? And now I suppose we also need to do that in some kind of an accelerated manner.
Yeah, see, India has launched these various missions for semiconductors and such, right? So hopefully that's something we are going to start getting better at. Truly, I mean, yes, it can't be that out of overnight we are going to start building things that beat Blackwell, but we have to start somewhere, right? Uh, on the hardware side, right? On various types of hardware. Uh, I will also say that it does ultimately come down to money and talent. Um, One of the things we'll have to do is even the startups we are building now, we see actually, I mean, the way I see it, they don't have large enough market in India, right? So if they have to actually think globally and they have to aim for global markets, I think that's a necessity. The second challenge that will then come is growth capital, right? So for them to achieve the kind of experience they need to grow, they have to go to global markets. And to be able to compete in global markets, they will need growth capital that I think currently is available to them only in international venture markets, right? And here is where I'm hoping RDI, right, the newly launched Research Development Innovation Fund of DST, will play a role because government is putting out 50% of money and saying investors or corporate R&D can put the other 50%, right? So right off the bat, they reduced it, right? Reduce the, I mean, these are essentially 11, $12 billion funds, right? 1 lakh crores. So um, I certainly think we are at the beginning of something very exciting, right? Despite all the challenges.
On the topic of core technologies, just to stay on that a little longer, a simple sort of survey of some of the things that researchers are doing, in the sort of well-established hubs, whether it's Israel or even UK, and of course in the US. Um, we see people doing some really very inventive stuff and not just innovative work on existing science or technology. Do you see examples of that happening now in India, whether at IIC or at other higher schools of learning? I mean, truly sort of not done before kind of science that has serious implications in terms of applications for different products, eventually technologies and so on. I mean, within the field of robotics itself, for example, in some of the advanced hubs, people are working on touch sensitivity, how to make robots sense pretty much the way we would sense something if we pick it up or things like that, and the advanced materials required for those for that kind of tech and so on. I mean, that's one small example just came to my mind. Do you see examples like that now happening in India?
In terms of the research and lab prototype stage, I do think Indian researchers are thinking as cutting edge as out there, right? But are we actually seeing the translation of these out of the labs? The answer is no, right? In specifically robotics, I think given the kind of capital investment that are required for the facilities, as let's be very honest, we are behind, right? So I cannot claim that we are doing things that the world has not achieved yet.
Okay. Uh, so, on the software side of robotics, can you give us a sense of what is the state of even research in India in terms of the physical AI stack that will be required? I have a very rudimentary understanding only of how perhaps a lot of the startups here are using the ROS 2 framework, open source software, and so on. But beyond that, are you aware of, or is ARTPARK even collaborating with any research initiatives to build physical AI stacks in India?
Yeah, so that is happening. I should also give you a caveat that I cannot say I would bring technical depth to this area myself, right? There is physical AI work happening in pretty much all the major institutions, right? Uh, but I don't know if there is an effort to bring like a full physical AI stack together. There are examples such as, uh, let's say, uh, for landing a drone on a moving object with unpredictable trajectory, right? Let's say there's a drone out there in the high seas and it has to go land on a relatively small ship that is bumping up and down on the waves, right? Uh, Now, that's a classic example of physical AI, right? And we have companies such as Vishwasys Aerospace, a professor out of IIC, Professor Radhakant Padi, right? He's building, and he was involved in developing the guidance navigation control systems for Chandrayaan 3, right? And the same person has launched a startup, keeping in mind these sort of applications in for drones and aerospace, right? That's an example of physical AI. Right? And earlier I mentioned the company Kinesthetic, that is that at ARTPARK and collaborating with ARTPARK, they are doing what you call a lot of robot data harvesting that would then help us train these models for various types of tasks, right? And it becomes a foundational model only when it is trained on such a variety of tasks, so that the next task that we you know try to train it for happens hopefully in just one or two demonstrations and does not even take the 30 minutes to 1 hour that it might take today, right? So I haven't exactly answered your question, but hopefully I gave you a sense of the types of things that we are trying to support. We haven't gone I'm not aware of, let's say, a moonshot type effort that says, look, let us build a physical AI foundation model that encompasses a huge number of tasks. And I don't entirely know if that would be the way that India or the world would move forward, because there are so many open source models that already exist that are pretty broad, that now I think folks are building narrower models. Maybe they do not go after all tasks, but they might end up actually being several models that we can use in some intelligent manner. One model potentially for perception and navigation and such. Maybe another type of model for things like manipulation and such, right? Um,
Okay. Um, I'm going to jump to asking you about a little bit in terms of policies and regulations, not from the government side, but in the research and industry collaboration ecosystem. What do you think? I mean, and in your travels, you would have seen all the big established hubs and so on, and you would have worked in some of them as well. What are the ways in which researchers, academicians are incentivized to translate the research into technological products in the best hubs, whether it's in Silicon Valley or in Israel? What comes to your mind in terms of what kind of policies have been successful that may be already being implemented in India or that we can learn from and so on?
By the way, I actually think India has fairly competitive incentives, unless there are while I know the global hubs, I cannot say I know their incentive structures very well. I'll tell you what we currently are able to do in India, right? A professor can go out of a reputed institution, take a sabbatical for a period of time, take their technology out, get substantial funding, right? Attract a team and get going. And in all this, give to the institution only single digit equity, right? This is possible in India today, right? Um, so uh, this flexibility, right, already exists in terms of being able to go out there. The second thing is publications as such. I know IISc, for example, does not care so much about the number of publications anymore. They only care about how good is your top one or two publications, right? So it's no more sort of a game where you try to get out lots of publications, right? That said, novelty in terms of uh, uh, a publication that would get accepted into a global journal does pull slightly away from uh, potentially building a startup, right? So that incentive contradiction to some extent remains. And it's not like uh, faculty in other places such as US constantly give up their job and go become startup founders. That's not how it happens. It just happens that the ecosystem around them uh, has matured to be rich enough that often the students of this faculty are able to go out, and the faculty participates as co-founders or advisors. And I think that sort of ecosystem now actually exists in India. We know of faculty, uh, who are involved in multiple startups and are co-founders themselves. I do not know of places that actually give faculty money to go out and, just because you launch a startup, you get certain money. I don't think that's necessarily a great incentive, though sometimes things like that are floated. But faculty have every ability uh, through their own incubators or associated incubators or venture builders, such as ARTPARK is certainly an example. A faculty can come out and pitch and you know get started with something like 1 crore, which is, but for the recent devaluation of the rupee that happened, I would have said $125,000, right? And sometimes it is in art park ecosystem, it is possible to get started even with 2 crores. That's like $250,000. So I would say that the incentives are probably getting to as good as they can. Maybe there are some tweaks that are there, and I think we are already beginning to use globally best benchmarks. I do think one place I do not know of and I hear stories about is China, right? I hear stories where uh, they attract star talent and faculty from US or Europe back to the Chinese shores and then help them build technology and also back startups that are especially building strategic technologies in a lavish way. Now, I do not have enough data to substantiate this, but perhaps there's a way to think about what can we do more in for certain core technologies, right? And how do we get especially the best faculty in those areas participate much more actively through perhaps proactive moonshot projects or something like that. And those are a couple of examples I have often and ideas I have often toyed with in my own mind. I don't know how feasible they are.
Okay, let me bring it back to the startups and projects within Art Park. You've given us some examples of companies that have already come to a stage where they have industry collaborations and even investments and are already commercializing their products. Overall, can you give us a sense of where most of the startups are at today in Art Park? How do you see them commercializing their products in the coming years? What does that timeline look like for you? That as well.
Yeah. See, so far at Art Park, we have put money in 30 startups, right? We have collaborated with more provided facilities for etc. Let me not count that. Out of those 30 startups, I would say probably one third certainly have customers, either, and they are what you might call it a TRL 6 stage or above, right? And uh, at least a handful, if not more, have raised follow on funding. And to me, and those are the ones who have been with us for 2 to 3 years, because we see that as the cycle time, right? Um, Another uh, one third, probably in what you might call mid TRL stages. Uh, they all have what you might call co-creators, and some have pilot customers even, right? They have not yet raised external funding, but they are well on their way. And there is another one third that we have essentially backed, perhaps over the last 6 to 12 months, who would be really in TRL 4 stage or so, right? 3 to 4 4 stage, right? They are building their prototypes, having customer interactions, etc. But they are not yet what you might call truly customer environments, proving their product, right? So to summarize, perhaps a one third have found product market fit. Some of them already have investors, uh, and the one third are in that journey, yeah, making promising progress towards that product market fit, right? And the one third are in very early stages where they are still putting together their prototypes and finishing their prototypes to be able to then collaborate with the industry closely.
Okay. One quick follow on the funding part, the money that Art Park invests in startups, does that continue to come from DST, or do you have plans, or you already have an existing venture unit? How does it work?
No, we are not a venture unit. We are a non-profit organization, right? So the money we have been investing, yes, predominantly has come from DST, but we also have a substantial complementary funding from Government of Karnataka, uh, and also we've had some funding over the last 3 years from Ministry of Heavy Industries. These are funds that we use to advance the technology as internal innovation projects, uh, predominantly. So even though, so this is where I said, right, maybe they haven't quite, maybe it's not money we are distributing to them as a startup, as an investment, but it's certainly money that is going into them under our umbrella to further the technology of what would be startups, right? So what that sometimes we internally call pre-ventures or innovation projects, right? Uh, so yeah, that's how. So money is uh, almost all government funding right now, but purely investment type money is DST. But it's not, that's not the only bit of money. There's substantial funding, equal more as money that we invest in quote unquote pre-commercial R&D, right, in advancing these things as innovation projects before we spin them out and um, you know take equity stake in them, or we invest as a CCD if they have already been incorporated.
Okay, very nice. And I guess, and it's pretty clear that that approach is very, very closely aligned with your mandate of building these technologies in the first place. Fair enough. So, to end this conversation, sir, can you talk about your vision? And I would include Professor Bharadwaj in that. So, over the next 5 years, 10 years, what would success look like for ARTPARK?
Sure. I think over the next 5 years, we would have quadrupled our throughput of startups. Currently, we are essentially, helping create or, grow 7 to 8 startups per year. That's the rate at which we've been adding to our portfolio. We want to quadruple that to 25 to 30 startups per year. That's number one. The second thing is we hope, of course, to make that happen, we need substantially more space, physical space, and substantially more funds, right? The Karnataka government, has been quite visionary in this manner. They have signed an MOU with us to develop a 9-acre space into what is called BRAINZ, Bengaluru Robotics, AI, and AI Innovation Zone. Right? So that would be a greenfield development in addition to our current facility here in Jalahalli. Then there is the RDI fund that I talked to you about. And we are hoping to become a second-level fund manager. I think we are well positioned there. And we would need to raise substantial funding, complementary funding to the RDI, because RDI is a 1:1 match from corporates, investors, and HNIs. Right? So that's the vision. At least quadruple our capacity. And if we were to do this all well, hopefully between our current facility here in Jalahalli and BRAINZ, at any point of time, you would have about 100 startups at various levels of maturity, with some global innovation centers from corporates who work heavily in autonomous systems and robotics, sector agnostic, of course, but especially in areas of, space and defense and medical technologies and industry, right? Manufacturing, right? So this is our vision, right? 100 startups co-located, doing all of this, right? Across our spaces, 12 acres of campus, right? And while we add 25 to 30 startups every year to this ecosystem.
What's a rough timetable for this campus to be up and running?
We'll do it in phases. We hope that in about 4 years' time, 3 to 4 years' time, we'll have, the first facility that probably is equivalent to what we currently have here. And then we'll keep building on it. But that would be another 5 to 6 year time frame, right? So by year 6 to year 7, I think it should be, 100% built out.
Okay. Anything that you would like to see come to fruition this year? I mean, whether it's in the sort of private industry or in the VC side of things, or even in terms of government, anything that you want to say would be great if it happens in 2026 in the context of India's deep tech ecosystems?
Well, I hope we fund as an ecosystem. I hope we fund at least 100 startups in really truly differentiated and early stage technology risks at TRL 4 stage, right? And I think RDI is coming into play, and that I think 100 should happen relatively easily. So I'm hoping that we'll see a lot more risk taking from our venture capital ecosystem. And I also hope that many of them collaborate with us here at ARTPARK, because we believe we are a unique ecosystem with facilities and talent.
That's it for today. You can find links to ARTPARK's website and Raghu's bio in the show notes. If you're an aspiring founder in India, especially in robotics and AI, do look them up. I'll be back with another episode of Specialty Focus. Until then, it's goodbye from me, Hari Arakli. Thank you for joining us.